We're going to take what we learned about the nth child selectors a little bit farther and apply them to something that probably is going to make a little bit more sense for how you would be working on a more common project. Here's the starting file that we'll be beginning with for this exercise, and this will be a multi-part exercise, so in order to get the completed one we'll go through a series of different videos so that we can learn all of the different techniques. But this is the basic one, and in just a moment I'll show you the HTML and CSS that we're starting with. The final file that we're going to be creating is going to look something like this. So essentially we're going to create an alternating list of comments, and these actually are list items, and you can see that there's going to be a person's picture, their name, their comment, and then the date that they make the comment. And obviously as we scroll through you can see how the comments are going to switch as far as the background colors, and that just makes the long list of comments a little bit easier for us to read as we look at these files. So we'll ultimately be creating this from this right here. The HTML that we're going to start working with looks like this, and this page is very similar to some of the ones that we've been using in the previous exercises. The main difference is that in the body section I still have my same header with an H1. Then I have an article tag that wraps around everything on the page except for the footer. And inside the article I have a section tag that just introduces what the page is about, so that contains an H1 and a paragraph. And then I have another section tag, and this next section tag is going to contain kind of the meat of the page. It starts off with an H2 and a paragraph, and then there's an ordered list, and within the ordered list the formatting is going to be very simple. All the list items follow a very similar sort of formatting. The list item contains a paragraph tag which states the date. It contains a paragraph tag that contains an empty span tag. We are going to be, with CSS, creating our image inside the span tag, and then the person's name is going to appear after the span tag. The paragraph tag then closes, and then we have another paragraph tag which has their comment, and then our list item closes. And you can see that this pattern just repeats itself over and over again for all of the people that have posted a comment on this particular page. We're going to begin by augmenting our CSS, and the CSS again is similar to what we've done in some of the other videos that we've been working on, so I won't go through all of this. You can review those other ones if you want. The only real difference that we have here is I have a rule on block quote, unordered lists, and ordered lists that just sets the margin on the top and the bottom to 0 and on the right and the left to 1.5 ems. This is simply creating a slight indentation on the ordered list, so that just is going to have those things be indented on the right and the left. Let's get started with what we're going to do. The first thing that I want to do here is I want to create some rules for the ordered list. So I'm going to remove the numbering on my ordered list by using the list style type of none. And then I'm going to create a rule for the list items themselves. So we'll create a rule for the list items. We're going to start by setting the background color. And for the background color, I'm going to use my RGBA color. The RGB values for the burgundy color are going to be 104, 60, 80, and then I'm going to set 0.5 or 50% opacity. Then we're going to go ahead and set a border radius of 10, which will round the corners. We're going to use a margin of 15 pixels on the top and the bottom and 0 for the right and the left. And we're going to use padding of 20 pixels on the top and bottom and 15 pixels on the right and the left. If we save this page and look in the browser window, you can see that the page is going to change from this to this. So all this is doing is it's simply putting a background color and rounding the corners on each of the individual list items. The next step that we're going to be doing is we're going to be using our nth child to kind of create zebra striping, so every other list item has a slightly different background color. My selector that I'm going to use is going to be li nth child, and then I'll just pass on the even keyword, and here we'll set the background color, and these values that I plugged in are going to kind of create a pale yellowy gold color. So that's going to be the background color for every other list item. I think what I'll do on both of these two is I'll add a border. So I'm just going to add a border, and our border here is going to be 1 pixel solid. And then once again I'm going to use some RGB colors, so I'm just going to plug in RGB. I'm not going to pass on alpha, just RGB, and I'll put the color values that I want here. And I'm going to use a border on the list item as well. If we save our page and we look at it in the browser, it's going to now look like this. So you can see that already by just using a little bit of nth child selectors, I've improved the layout and the readability of this page. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start to format the content that is within these list items. Now you'll recall that inside each list item I have the first paragraph, which is going to style the date. Then I have the second paragraph, which contains a span tag, which will ultimately have the image. And then my third paragraph has the comment. So what we're going to do in our CSS selectors is I'm going to make a rule for the date. And the selector that I'm going to be using is going to be OLP first of type. And what I want to do is I'm going to create a border on the bottom. I'm going to float this on the right. I'm going to set the font weight to bold. I'll add some padding on the bottom. I'm going to text align to the right. And I'm going to restrict the width to be 500 pixels. If we save and look in the browser, when I refresh my page, I forgot my semicolon there. Okay, let's try that again. Knew that something was missing. When I refresh the page, the date now is going to have the border on the bottom. The text should be on the right though. Let's just look at that real quickly. All kinds of little errors in here. I'll put the colon in there so that the text align right will render correctly. All right, there we go. So now the date's going to appear on the right. The date is bold, and we have this underline right here. You can see because this item is floated, these other items that follow it now are kind of pulled up to the left of the date. That is going to help us because ultimately we want the image to kind of be right around this area, and then the text we're going to have appearing underneath this line, which it will by the time we're done. The next item that we're going to be formatting is we're going to style the p tag that contains the span tag for the image and the name. This paragraph tag is always going to be the second paragraph tag that appears inside the list because our date appears first and then the second paragraph tag is going to appear next. So the selector I'm going to use is going to be OLP, and then we're going to use nth child 2, which will always select the second paragraph tag. We'll have this item float on the left. We'll set its font size, some margin on the top. We'll text align center so that the text centers underneath the image, and I'm going to set a width value of 50 pixels. The reason I'm using 50 pixels is that is the width value of my image, so I want the text to align underneath the image. If we save now and refresh in the browser, and let's just throw a border on this temporarily so we can see what's happening. You can see that now this item is going to appear on the left and the border shows and the text is centered within the box. Next, I'm going to make a rule for the very last paragraph, which is going to be the person's comment. Now, all of our comments are just one paragraph, but it might be a situation where the person might write more extensive comments, so there might be more than one. So let's use a nth child selector that will allow us to select all of the paragraphs except for the first two. So we're going to go ahead and use p nth child, And then I'm going to pass on the argument, the math argument, since I want to select all numbers except for the first two, or I want to start after the count of the first two. I'm going to put n plus 3, and we're going to set the font style to italic, and we're going to set a margin setting of 50 pixels for the top, 10 for the right, 10 for the bottom, and 75 pixels for the left. Let's just quickly add one more paragraph so we can test this out. I'll just copy this paragraph and paste it in. And when we go into the browser and refresh our page, you can now see that the text is italicized and it's being pushed in to where we want it. Now the only real problem I see is that I do want to create this 50 pixels of spacing from this line down from the first one, but then any subsequent paragraphs that follow, this spacing is a little too much. So let's augment our selectors here slightly. I'll just copy this rule and paste it in. I'm going to leave the font style of italic and leave this rule as it is, but for the margin settings, we're going to set the margin on the top to any that follow, and let's change this to 4. We'll change the margin on the top to 15 pixels. And we'll leave the rest of these settings as is, and we're going to just change this selector to simply the third one. So the third paragraph is going to take on the font styling of italic, and it's going to have these margin settings. Any paragraph that is beyond the third one will be italic and then have these margin settings. So if we save and refresh in the browser now, you can see that that looks much better, and it doesn't affect any of the posts or the comments that just have one paragraph. But when we have more than one paragraph, that's still going to work. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a rule for the span tag. This is not going to use an nth child selector initially. We're just going to make a rule for any list item that has a span tag, and we're going to set the width and the height. We're going to have these display as block level elements, and I'm going to set their background image. And what I've done is I've created an image sprite. An image sprite is one image that contains a bunch of sub-images, and we're going to offset those with CSS to have the image switch out as we go through. As soon as I'm done with this, I'll show you the entire image just so you know what it looks like. And I'm going to tell this image to not repeat. So if I save the page right now and we refresh in the browser, all of the little image icons are going to look exactly the same. Let me show you my image real quickly. Here's what my image looks like. It is 50 pixels wide and 450 pixels high, and every 50 pixels I show a different picture. So what I'm going to do with CSS is I'm just going to only display 50 by 50 pixels, but we'll be offsetting the position of this image to display different faces for each of the different posts. This is a pretty common technique that's used in CSS. It can save load time by only making one HTTP request, and then you just offset parts of the image to show different sections of it. So what we want to do ultimately is we don't want these to all display with the same image. We want to switch them out, and we'll be using nth child to be able to change the offset for the rest of these list items. Let's go back into the code. The other thing that I want to eliminate at this point is this border that we put on the second paragraph. So let's just eliminate that. We don't need that anymore. And then we're going to make our more specific selectors. So here I'm going to use a selector of my li nth child, and then in the parentheses we're going to pass on the number that we want to affect. The first list item is displaying the image as we want it to be, so we'll leave that as is. But all of the rest we're going to target a specific number. So this is now going to affect the second list item, and we're affecting the span tag of the second list item because we're being more specific with our selector. So we're going to use the CSS property of background position, and we're just going to set the horizontal position to 0. We don't want to change that, but the vertical position we're going to offset by -50 pixels, which is going to pull that image up. So if we save now and we refresh in the browser, you can see that this second list item now is switching images and it's showing a different image as opposed to the first one and then all the rest. So we will just use this same technique a bunch of times, and we'll just change our offset here and change the nth child selector. So I'm just going to offset my image by 50 pixels until I display all of the images, and I'll just really quickly make the rest of the selectors here because they all follow the same exact pattern. Alright, if we save now and we refresh in the browser, all of the little picture icons are going to swap out and display different images. So that is another useful way that you can use nth child selectors to be able to control things that are on our page. So now we have the basic formatting of this page. It's looking pretty good. In the next video, I'm going to show you some advanced features that you can do with CSS3 in conjunction with color. You can see that the colors on my final image appear to be a little more glossy, a little bit more of a gradient, and we're going to do that with CSS as well. But this is what we needed to do initially anyways, using our nth child selectors to be able to customize the look of this page.